All right, I've got a simple question for you today to consider. If you were to think about the entire United States of America and all the people that file a tax return in the United States, would you consider your adjusted gross income, your household adjusted gross income, would you consider it common or uncommon statistically? Now, if you said uncommon, I'd have to ask a follow-up question. I'd say, well, is it uncommonly low or uncommonly high? If you said originally common, then I'd ask you, now, is that just common in regards to your current demographic, like where you are located, or common across the entire United States? So understanding where you sit is a key component to understanding what advice you should be following. Let me get to that here. You're going to like this one. Okay, so I already drew some things out on my handy dandy notepad here. So what I want to look at is the household AGI. Now, this column's for your guess, and this column is the actual according to the federal government, and the most recent tax data is from 2014. So if I were to ask you, what does it take to be in the top 50% in household AGI? Half the population is behind you, half the population makes more money than you. Most people put it somewhere around 40 grand. In the top 25%, now 75% of the population is behind you. I get a lot of people that say 75 grand. The top 10%, man, only 10% of the population is above you. 90% of the population does not make as much as you do as your entire household. I get a lot of people that'll say 150, okay? And now the top five, man, 95% of every single household that files tax returns, it doesn't make as much as you. This is where I'll get a lot of people that will often say like 300,000 bucks a year. Okay, and now the infamous one percenters, right? We remember all that stuff. We are 99. Couple presidential elections ago, these guys and gals were referred to as the corporate jet owners and flyers. So obviously, there's a huge political talking point about the one percenters. What do you think it takes to be in the top 1%? And I typically get people that say $1 million or more. I've had some people go crazy high. I had someone tell me they actually think it takes 50 million bucks a year to be in the top 1%. So now let's look at the actual. In order to be in the top 50% in the country, you need to make about 38. Most people get this one pretty close. To be in the top 25, about 78. And again, people get very close to these first two, but they start to kind of separate here. In the top 10, it only takes 133,000 as a household to be in the top 10%. And this is where a lot of people start to miss this gap here. To be in the top five as a household, you need to show an AGI of 189,000. And the one percenters, 465 grand a year is all it takes to be in the top 1% in the country. Now, for the individuals that I work with, some of them might be down here, but almost everybody I work with desires to move up this percentage chart here. And that's a critical component, because what I want to look at also is the percent of taxes paid by each of these. So the top 1% pay 39.48% of all federal income taxes. Just 1% of the population pays almost 40% of our federal burden. The top 5% pay 59.97. 5% pay about 60% of the entire federal tax obligation. That is crazy. The top 10% pay 70.88. The top 25, 86.78. And the top 50, 97.25. Meaning half of the population are responsible for less than 3% of our tax burden federally. But let's get back to that. Are you common or uncommon? I'm confident that if you're watching this, you fall in this arena, that you fall in being statistically uncommon. So my question to you is, why in the world would you follow common advice? Now, let's look at this. What are all of these people here told to do? Every one of them is told to defer their tax to the future date. They're told to shove as much as they can into their IRA or their 401k. And they're told that they will be in a position to save on taxes. Now, look at this. Isn't this interesting? Doesn't it seem to make a little sense why these people here cannot do a Roth IRA? The federal government can't afford them to be doing that. The federal government certainly takes the tax now, today, but also wants to be in a position to take the tax in the future from these people who have the ability to actually create wealth. But I find it so fascinating that the 1%ers are given the exact same advice as every single person on this chart. Literally tell me something different that everybody is told to do in a traditional financial planning sense. Everybody on this chart is given the same advice. So if you are in fact uncommon, should you be following common advice? The answer to that is obvious. Absolutely not. And I'm sure earlier when I asked you, if you were to take your overall pie that you're looking to build, all of your wealth, and in the future when it's time to finally use that wealth, you get to decide how much of it you want to share with the IRS. How big would you make that slice if it was up to you to carve it? I'm very common. You said none of it or some form of that. Well, okay. Is that your current exit strategy? Are you set up that way? Are you in an uncommon position from an income standpoint? If so, man, I urge you to pay attention to these conversations. And at the very least, well, let me ask it this way. Do you trust your current plan enough to get a second opinion? So let's do this. Let's at least take a look at where you're sitting, what you have, and the opportunities that exist for you to get what you want here with this pie of wealth that you have. You can click those buttons. Click the button, click the link that connects you to my calendar. You can schedule right on my calendar. Let's have a conversation.